put him in charge of a panel about anything but numbers. But we are thrilled to be joined by, again, by Brian as the moderator for a panel about intangibles, team chemistry, and how teams navigate the space of being able to create value out of that, or if they can. And Brian is going to be joined on that panel by author Joan Ryan and former big leaguers Rickie Weeks and Jonny Gomes.
All right. Yeah, this is not something I would have selected for myself, but here we go. But it's interesting. Just as a little bit of background, I remember having dinner with Joan, and hopefully we'll see Joan up there in a moment, with Joan and her husband, Barry Tompkins, who calls boxing. Remember, he did HBO boxing years ago and was still doing boxing with me for DAZN very recently. And she said, Brian, I'm writing a book that you're going to hate. It's on team chemistry. Now, I don't hate team chemistry. Johnny, you know that we've had discussions. But we, for generations, team chemistry seemed to be the all-covering answer to everything. Why are you winning? Why does this team win? It was about the guys get along, the guys are having fun out there. But I do recognize that team chemistry, energy, right? Energy, feeling good about yourself, feeling good as a team when you're clicking, when the parts just go together. That does exist. So I don't want it to be come across as, oh boy, I hate this stuff. It's there, and I think now that we're all kind of talking the same language of baseball production, it really is a good time to study, okay, what makes a team click? And again, Jonny Gomes played 13 years. He was with the Rays, famously with championship teams with the Red Sox and the Royals. Was always a good stick, a power hitter, even late in his career. And then famously a glue guy, as they say, right, Johnny? So famously one of those good guys in the clubhouse that gets everybody invigorated. Rickie Weeks was 14 years, an all-star in 2011, 11 years with the Brewers, an excellent player. So we have a good representation here, and I don't know what their answers are going to be as far as what can you define it, can you identify it? So can we bring in Joan? Johnny, give us what are your thoughts on trying to actually identify or quantify that magic thing that happens that actually makes everybody in the room better?
Yeah, again, I'm a firm believer in it, of course, but at the same time, I'm a believer in the game of baseball is results-driven. With that being said, the stats, the numbers, the averages, that's what matters. At the same time, there's a couple like events and slogans that I go back to. You know, I always tell the story of back in the day when you're, you know, on the sandlot and all this stuff, and you have two captains, 10 years old, I got 12 people out in front of you, like, who do you pick? You know, do you pick the kid who lives a couple blocks away, or do you pick your best friend? Because you're gonna play better with your best friend, and you're gonna be accountable more with your best friend, and you kind of know the way he ticks, what he likes to do, and you eventually could find yourselves in situations where you both can shine. Now, how much can we relate sandlot baseball to the big leagues? Iffy, you know, but at a 162-game season with the ups and the downs, and then at the end of the day, which different from sandlot to the big leagues, you have to report to a manager, you have to report to a coach, you have to report to a GM. So at the end of the day, what they say stands. But there's also scenarios, too, when you're on deck, bases loaded, one out, and the guy in front of you punches out, and he's dragging his bat back. If you have a smidge of an itch in you to want to get a hit for your buddy so he can get his head up instead of having his head in the sand, you kind of have that extra edge. The game's too hard to turn on and turn off, but there are situations where you can turn it up, and majority of the time, it is for your teammates. You're in the outfield, the guy just walks 3 in a row, you kind of put your head down and you're like, oh great, here we go again. or you kind of get on your toes and you're like, I'm going to dive and catch any ball in the air for my buddy that he can get out of this. So I think it'd be a unique graph to draw up. It's not quite the heartbeat, but I think at the same time that there's a lot to, there's definitely a method to the madness for sure.
Okay. Rickie, what about you? Your overall thought and theory on it?
Well, for me, I think kind of piggyback off Johnny. So it's a lot of time throughout a course of a season. There's ups and downs, of course, like he says. But to me, I feel like when you're into a point of situation throughout a season where you might not have the lowest, the best of games, but that one person or that collective group of guys in there, they have a innate ability to pick that guy up. I think that's where we're going to about the clubhouse atmosphere and how can we improve that, but also kind of keep the numbers in play there. Because a lot of times, we can be so forward driven towards numbers that you lose that real factor of, okay, that guy who might not be the best player, but he brings something to the table to where he makes the team better.
Before we get to Joan, I'm just wondering, have you been in a situation where you've seen that working, and can you identify, Johnny, you first, like what was it before? Because I think Joan has done the research on what it is. What have you found it is, like when you were with some of those Magic teams, was it just production, or was there enough of an emotional component where you were actually performing better because of those who were around you?
I think it's a unique situation. I think there's a lot of different situations. The things that I have noticed and I've seen are there have to be reasons and scenarios that are defined of why the team wants to win. If you're in the big leagues, you obviously want to win for different reasons, right? Do you want to win the biggest contract? Do you want to win to make it to the All-Star game? Do you want to win to prove someone wrong, like you got a chip on your shoulder? Do you want to win the World Series? Do you want to win for your teammates? All those are right. All those are successful. But what you do have to do is you have to create an atmosphere and identity inside the clubhouse and try and get 25 guys on board plus the staff to rally around one of those things. I'd say in 2008, with a $42 million payroll going to the World Series with the Tampa Bay Rays in the AL East. Let's not lose that one. What was the reason there? What the driving force there, I thought, was we all won together in the minor leagues. By the time we all got to the big leagues, Rocco Baldelli got there, Carl Crawford got there, a couple others. I'd say the last one to get there was probably James Shields. Scott Kazmir came over in a trade from the Mets, but he went to Double-A, so he was kind of homegrown. Ben Zobrist came over from Houston, but he went to Double-A and then came, so he kind of became homegrown. And we all won together. And by the time we got to the big leagues, that's all we knew. So in a copycat league like MLB, that's kind of where the homegrown deal started. And that's all we knew how to do was win. So by the time we got there, shedding the old, forest green unis and going to the other, the Rays, it kind of kick-started, the winning atmosphere. But we were all winners before that. That's all we knew. I mean, we had Baseball America's Top 100. We had Baseball America's 1. We had the most winning farm system. And I went over to the Reds in 2010. And there was that big trade when Dunn left and Griffey left, and that gave the opportunity for Jay Bruce, for Joey Votto, Drew Stubbs, Paul Yanish, it goes on and on, Todd Frazier, here comes Aroldis Chapman. And I think what stood out there was the opportunity. A lot of guys just got the opportunity. And then we can keep going on and on, but I just think there has to be something for the ball club to rally around. It stands out 2012. These guys literally wanted to win the ball game for the pie on the interview at the end of the game. Every time we won a damn game, these guys were running around with a pie, pieing the guy at the interview and dumping him with Gatorade. I thought it was the dumbest thing I've ever seen, but how they rallied around that situation as a whole. Who am I to be the fun police and be the old guy to be like, that's not what this game's about. There's so much more on the line than the pie. But they all rallied around it. We got to the yard and set out the pie right from Jump Street. And there's others, and you go to Boston, the Royals and stuff, but there has to be something outside of numbers, outside of really what's in the clubhouse that everyone can rally around that can drive the winning force home.
So like a group identity, and the incentive plan can be simpler than we think, is what you're saying. Let me see. Joan, can you hear us?
I can now.
Excellent. Okay, and I think it's in real time. Joan Ryan is the author of Intangibles, and that's going to come out in late April, and she's done the study on this. Joan, give us what you found during the research for the book on team chemistry.
Well, there's 250 pages about team chemistry in the book, but I'll just try to sum up a little bit of it. I mean, really the big takeaway, the bottom line, is that what I discovered is that team chemistry is a biological, physiological construct. It's not just something that, some explanation we give to every team that has matching beards and who seems to overachieve. That we're wired. We're the most social animals on Earth, and over 3 million years, our brains, our brains tripled in size because it wasn't for our intellect, it was for all that social wiring. So it's innate in us to be affected by each other. So tone of voice, body language, all of those things, our brains just, we send out those signals and we react by totally recalibrating our own tone of voice, blah, 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 blah. So we know that we influence each other like every moment of every day. I mean, it's happening in that room right now, right? So, of course, why wouldn't it happen in locker rooms? And it affects our performance. Because really, why would we even talk about team chemistry unless it affects performance? And we know in our personal relationships, Brian, I know you love your wife, right? And I know she makes you a better man, right? So if that can be true for all of us in our relationships, then of course it can be true in all the rest of, other parts of our lives.
Okay, Rickie, comment on that. On what Joan? Hold on 1 minute. Let's just get Rickie your thoughts on that as far as what your experience in the major leagues and all through baseball has taught you about that wiring and what Joan was talking about.
No, Joan is exactly right. She's, I think the biggest thing is every year is different. Every team is different. Going back to Milwaukee, 2008 went to the playoffs. We didn't get back to the playoffs again until 2011. So there's things that happen throughout the season or throughout a couple of years where, like dynamics change, coaches change. There's a lot of variables that change that you just don't get back. So with that being said, and a lot of times that you need an extra piece of material maybe to check up on a guy, to check up on a coach, and things like that. So to me, it's it's just a variable of going from year to year.
Yeah, Joan, I guess the next question is, recognizing it's there, how do you create it in a room? Joan?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, how do you create, if you've identified it and you want it on your team and you have a major league clubhouse, how do you then create that where it is a supportive environment that is clicking, that's maximizing performance?
Right. And, that's obviously a really nuanced, it has to be a really nuanced answer. I mean, it's all about, it starts with the culture, and you have to have a culture of trust and caring, like in any human relationship, right? So leadership is a huge, huge part of it. And it's not just, the manager and the coaches, if we're talking about baseball, it's the leaders on the team. And, somebody like Jonny Gomes, as we know, even though, he was never a star, he's a journeyman player, basically, he was a huge leader and a huge influence. And, there are certain people who just have such a profound influence that I call them super carriers of chemistry. And, in my book, I identify these 7 archetypes that most teams with great chemistry, they manifest these character types, which I can, name for you if you'd like. But Jonny Gomes, people who are super carriers like Jonny Gomes, they're like the embodiment of all 7 archetype characters. And there's no getting around the fact that Jonny Gomes lifted the performance of the teams he was on.
Right. Joan, what are the archetypes? That's interesting. What are we talking about?
So the archetypes are, that one is the sage, and we all know the sage. It's God, I'm blanking on his first name, Ross from the Cubs. David Ross, right? So it's like, the stage is like the grandpa, the guy who's a veteran, no judgment. Any player can go up to him and he gives him advice and he feels safe and cared for. The kid, the kid is the guy who comes into the clubhouse and is just so excited about everything. He goes into the dining room and it's like, oh my God, we got a cappuccino maker, that sort of thing. And everybody remembers why they love the sport. And then there's the buddy, nobody eats alone. The spark plug, like a Hunter Pence type of guy. The enforcer, who says, we don't do it like that here. Keeps everybody on track, not straying. And there is did I say warrior? No, and the warrior, who is sort of that guy, like a Barry Bonds, really. A Barry Bonds, or like in basketball, Kevin Durant, who is he's the embodiment of what we all want to be. Like, as long as we have that guy on our team, we always feel like we can win.
All right, that's interesting. At a lot of levels that you went Barry there. Hold on a second. Before we go down that rabbit hole, your thoughts on the archetypes, right? Johnny, what are your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, those are obviously right on, but I think to get a title of one of those, each one of those persons has to be accountable, right? You can't be the warrior, every now and again. You can't be the fun guy every now and again. You can't hold the clubhouse accountable for something that you're not doing. So to earn those titles that, Joan is given individually, you have to be accountable. You have to be that person every single day. I mean, I've come across multiple guys, that want to be the enforcer and hold kids accountable for not running hard to first when they don't run hard to first. And you done just lost the whole team right there. So I think to have those characteristics, I'm sure a lot of guys coming up want to pick one of those to be, but if you're not accountable every single day, every single night, 0 for 4, 4 for 4, it doesn't work. So that's where the separation is who has those titles and are accountable of those titles.
Joan, are you supposed to have, can you have too many of one type, or do you try to get a broad spectrum of those archetypes? Explain that.
Well, the thing is, you can't hire archetypes. The team manifests the archetype. When you're a super carrier, that's a real obvious thing. You hire Jonny Gomes to be on your team for all those good reasons. But like, if you're the jester, or if you're the sage, if you're the kid, you don't know you're the sage or you're the kid. You don't know you're the enforcer. Like, you don't go out and try to fill that role. You just are. And Johnny's exactly right. You can only be the enforcer because the team has made you the enforcer. You can never just make yourself the enforcer. And so that's why, like, if there's already an enforcer on the team, that person who was going to be the enforcer, or maybe was an enforcer on a different team, becomes different on that team because it's your teammates who shape who you are, really. So, like Hunter Pence was never a spark plug before he got to the Giants in 2012. And all of a sudden, that team, that year, those particular guys, he was a spark plug. So it's about relationships. It's about who we help each other to be, and what the team actually needs, if that makes sense.
Okay. Let me push back on this for a second. And Rickie, I'll put it this way. Why why, if I sign you like after one of your good years, why can't I just expect you to do your job? Produce. You're Rickie Weeks, you've been in the league 6 years, you made the All-Star game like 2011, 2012. If I'm buying you, say, at your peak, and you're a 3 or 4 win player at second base, good on base, all those skills, and I'm buying all those skills, and I want to know, hey, you're a good guy, that's good. Just as a question, why can't I expect you just to do your job?
Well, I think a lot of times, we sometimes in baseball throw around a title sometimes too much. He's a captain because he's been in the league for so long. He's the best player on the team, so he's labeled a captain. But man, to go back to what Jonny said, sometimes it's just not that guy. Sometimes think sometimes it's that player that exudes the hustle, the mentality, the corporate, to say the tough things to the people sometimes, and sometimes we get in the way of thinking this guy who we bought or we brought in, saying that since he has all these numbers, he's going to make this change and he's going to make this clubhouse better. Sometimes that's just not true.
Okay, but even production-wise, Joan, let me throw it to you. Let's say
Yeah.
I hit the free agent market, I pick up Rickie Weeks, I pick up as, we talk about 2013 Red Sox, you get Napoli, you get Victorino, you get Johnny, and say, hey, they're good guys, that's great, but what I need them to do is their jobs. I need them to produce. Why shouldn't
Right.
I just expect them to do that?
Because they're not machines. You can't just flip the switch and they're going to do the same thing day in and day out. We're all affected by our emotions. And Jake Peavy actually put it best to me when I interviewed him about this. I said, Jake, I look at you on that mound. He's the snorter and the stomper, and he's yelling at himself. And, as we all know, he gives 100%. And I said, Jake, why would team chemistry matter to you at all? You're already given 100%. You can't give more than 100%. And he said, my teammates summon from me something I can't summon for myself. And that's it. That is it in a nutshell. Is that because we so deeply affect each other, you can pull out performances from people that it's just like, you walk into a cocktail party, and then there are just certain people that just their presence, they kind of change the energy of the room. And even veteran players said, you think that after all these years, you can just do your job and show up day in and day out. And you're like, it is a long frickin' season. And sometimes you get it in slumps, and you need your teammates to lift you out of that. So they're not machines, Brian. And that's where I think people kind of get a little bit lost about what team chemistry is.
Okay. No, it's interesting. They're not machines, but you have process, right? So, Johnny, weigh in on that. Why? If I'm buying Joey Votto or you, wouldn't I I'm buying your process, do your job? Answer that.
Well, I think the blueprint to that was the Florida Marlins opening up that stadium, right? You remember that year back in the day when they got all those free agents down there in Miami, also with the manager in Guillen, and nothing worked.
Reyes, Burley, and who was the
Heath
closer?
Bell.
Heath Bell? Yeah, okay.
Heath Bell. And, going into spring training, going into the season, they're picked to win the division and possibly the whole thing. And what went wrong? Everything. What went right? Nothing. So I think if we all were to dial into that and research into that, I think everyone would pick something out different. But you talk about they went out and got these high caliber free agents to do their job, and they didn't.
Well, you know what? You'd have to look at it. You could say they bought the wrong free agents. I thought that at the time.
Well, you could argue that they bought the wrong ones, but they definitely didn't do what they did do in the past. They didn't make the All-Star game, any of them.
Okay. I'd have to look and see what Burley did, and what Reyes did. But
it's pretty easy to figure out they didn't do a lot because they didn't do anything at all, and they ended up doing a fire sale. They did
think they bought
not.
the wrong guys,
They
but-
did not. Yeah, would you have gave them that much money? Probably not. But would you have signed them? Probably. Regardless how much money you gave them, they did not put the numbers up that they did the previous 6 years.
What about Jake's comment, which I think that's fascinating, is I can summon something for my teammates that I can't summon from myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, goes into like a family atmosphere. I think it really does. I mean, you could probably pull a school teacher who's around kids all day long, and the kid sneezes and drops his cup on the ground or his lunch on the ground, she walks away. And then she goes home, and her son sneezes, her son drops a cup on the ground, she picks it up and wipes his nose. Why? Because it's hers. And she cares more, and she wants to see that person do well. I think, how do you create that atmosphere inside a clubhouse? But at the end of the day, those are two different atmospheres and two different situations, and I guarantee the one on the right, where you're wiping the nose and cleaning the cup, you're going to get more love, more care out of that kid. So going into the baseball scenario, I think the care, the atmosphere, the family atmosphere, you're going to get more performance.
Joan, are clubs now trying to either what, like Jonny said earlier, create an identity, or as you said, create a culture? Are they actively pursuing these things?
Well, as you know, I'm a media consultant for the Giants, and they definitely are, with their new coaching staff and Gabe Kapler, they are trying to do that. Now, just to go back a little bit, Brian, is that, the important thing about team chemistry, one of the important things, is that you only have team chemistry if the product improves. Team chemistry is not camaraderie. It's not cohesion. It's not a lot of the things we think it is. You only have team chemistry if the product, and the beers and all that is evidence of the team chemistry, but you have to have the team chemistry first. And if you want any research about how trust and bonding affects performance, you just look at the military. No entity has done more research on how trust and bonding affects performance. Because guess what? They know that when you're on that battlefield, noble purpose, God and country mean nothing. You fight for each other because it's the depth of commitment, and really, like they talk about, the love they have for each other is the only thing powerful enough to keep them performing at such a high level under almost unbearable stress, which is why you have boot camp that is so stressful, because it bonds them and it makes them, all kinds of things, builds trust and bonding in the military. But, they've known that for armies for centuries and centuries have known this. And when teams know it, they can really harness that to their advantage.
Okay. Rickie, you're working with youth baseball now, right?
Yes.
Rickie, so, all right, so if you had this knowledge and this is what you want to create bonding and love in the room, is there a proper way of developing that?
No, not really. I think with team chemistry or team bonding, it kind of grows organically. I think when it comes to youth, comes to college, comes to Major League Baseball, it grows on organically. And I think when you get to a situation where you need that next person to step up, or when you need that next pitch thrown, that's when it that's when you exude the promise of that team chemistry. I know what Johnny told me last week. It's gonna help me out today. So for me, it's the fact that when you're able to come to a ballpark, 162 games in 180 days, you have to rely on your family, and your family is a baseball team in there, and you'd be surprised what helps the player out from day to day.
Jonny, we hear these things like corporate team building. I don't know if you've ever gone through that sort of thing, but you see that. Does it have to be organic, or can you, if you have leaders, create that either by maybe a boot camp sort of situation or team building exercises, or how could you create that, if at all?
So I've been fortunate enough to go to playoffs 6 different times with 5 different teams, 2 being Oakland, 1 wild card, and one the division. So everyone wants to build like team building. Everybody wants championship talk. Everybody wants to do what the greats do. Well, the greats and the champions are elite. Like, you can't be those people. You have to do so much more to be those person. So what I always focused on is people wanted to compare like 2013 and 15, the Royals and the Red Sox, and what team do you think was better, and the other teams that went to playoffs. And the winning teams I've been on are all totally different. They're all totally different. But the losing teams that I was on are all exactly the same. And I think we forget about that. We forget about that. Like, you go to the Royals, and our starter's ERA was terrible, but we had the 6, 7, 8, 9 guy. You know, you go to the Red Sox, and our motto was walk, walk, 3-run homer. You go to the Royals, and it was single, 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 like that. Totally different formulas, totally different beliefs, totally different everything. But you go to the last place teams, and those are all identical. They all suck. You know, the examples Joan gave of, you know, the titles of individuals, you know, the Warriors and the Enforcers, there's none of those. Maybe you go on the winning team and a guy has 2 roles, or a guy has 3 roles, or there's not an enforcer on the whole team. No one knows how to fight. But I think we do so much of trying to get to the top and what the top does. Like, if you want to follow LeBron James, you'll be exhausted. Just don't do what the dude that sucked does, right? Don't do what these people do. Don't focus on what these people do. You'll do it on your own. Like, you go to the 25-man roster on the All-Star team, and they all have different routines. They all have different diets. They all look at the game different. And then you go to the 25 worst guys on MLB, I guarantee they're all the same. So there's not really a formula, but we always do these team buildings to get better. I think you need to focus on what doesn't work and to nip that in the butt first.
Hey, Joan, it brings up an interesting point. Is this grassroots, or is this top-down if you're looking to create the best atmosphere?
Well, I mean, I think that leadership does matter, but ultimately it's the players that have to make it work. You know, I use the Warriors have a, they're a just us. You know, that's their sort of little motto, just us. And all great groups, whether it's business or teams, are almost like on islands by themselves. They know they have to count on each other because it's all, a coach can help, but, once you're out there, just like on a battlefield, they have to rely on each other. So it really is the leadership in the clubhouse. Again, you create a culture of trust, and you hope it works. Now, a question that I always get, Brian, is, well, what about, like, for instance, those 70s A's and Yankees teams, that were always fighting, and, it didn't seem like they needed chemistry at all, right? So, right. I mean, how can we even say chemistry is a factor when we had many championship teams that didn't seem to need it? But they did have chemistry, just like with Barry Bonds and Jeff Kent. I mean, they had incredible chemistry. It was just task chemistry. It was about how deeply they trusted each other on the field, how deeply they both, and those 70s teams, how deeply everyone was committed to winning, and you totally trust them. I mean, they were the 25 players, 25 Cavs teams, but they had incredible chemistry on the field. But most teams can't rely on just past chemistry, right? It's the clubhouse chemistry that shores up and fuels that commitment to each other.
Joan, these teams were having fist fights. Like, how were they trusting each other on the field? I mean, I know it's not basketball or soccer. You don't have to share the ball, but explain that, or go refute that. Yeah,
well, they're not punching each other on the field. They could be punching each other in the dugout, as Kent and Bonds absolutely did. There was the one famous fight that was on camera. And what happened? Kent hit either Bonds or Kent, I can't remember who it was, hit a home run, and an inning later, and who's first on the steps to give him a high five is the other one, right? They totally trusted each other. And I interviewed them both for a chapter in the book. And they both said there's nobody I would rather have on the field with me. Bond said that about Kent. Kent said that about Bond. They never go out together. They couldn't stand each other. Yet on the field, they had nothing but respect because they knew the other guy cared as much about winning and cared as much about the game as he did.
Okay, Rickie, weigh in on that then.
No, to me, I mean, she's spot on. You know, a lot of times, you know, you think about the time that you grew up playing, then you get in minor league baseball, things change. You know, there's fights in the clubhouse, there's fights on the field. Then you get to big leagues, the same thing happens. You know, so man, for me, it's more testament to you know, the player and the team to just, you know, man, they're trying to trust one another. But a lot of times, it's you know, it's pretty hard to trust with somebody who just got in a fist fight with man last night. You know, so and a lot of times it comes down to trust, comes down to and the wanting to win comes down to the, you know, I call it KI, the killer instinct to go out there and try to, you know, make something happen to win a ball game.
Johnny, have you played with someone where you just thought, man, I can't stand that guy?
Yeah.
Okay, and how did that work then in pursuing a common goal? Did it impede it or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest hurdles in coaching where I am now is also the same hurdle as being a player is, to use the example, like every single player has a different language. They all speak different languages, they think differently, and you have to find that language. You can't get told that language. You have to find what makes that player tick, and more importantly, you have to find like what makes that player lay down, right? Like we can spend all day trying to find what makes him tick, but we just cannot do what makes him lay down. So, you know, from Jump Street, the dude I can't stand, we just have different beliefs and different ways of looking at the everyday activities and the everyday this and that, looking at it differently. But what's going to make him lay down is what I can't cross over. So with that being said, like you got to do your research, if you will. You know, you got to sit down and talk to someone that you don't like and have nothing in common with, and, you know, just make it work and find that medium ground.
Joan, let me ask you this. If, let's say I'm a major league team, and I know you've done all this research, and I said, Joan, we have a good team. It should be working. It's not. What should we do? What would you advise a team with a dysfunctional room that should be better, a better team, but they're not? What would you advise for them to do?
Well, you've got to have people around that are astute enough to really dig in deep and find out what's going on. I mean, one thing is, you know, just like we have the positive archetypes, you know, there's the negative archetypes, and the two that can ruin any team and are totally contagious are the malingerer and the complainer, you know, the clubhouse lawyer, you know, as they call them. And those guys you do have to get rid of because they do infect the rest of the clubhouse. They're hard to stop.
Okay, Rickie, what do you think of that? So get rid of them, or can you win over people like that, or do you say no? There's certain guys you can't save.
No, some guys you just can't save. Dads, just go back to the fundamental laws of the clubhouse. You know, just sometimes, you know, you talk to them to the blue in the face, and if things don't change, they're not going to change. These are grown men you're talking about, so you're just not youth baseball no more. So for me, it's the fact that when you're in a position of authority or, you know, leader on the team, you say what you got to say. If they don't abide by it, then you got to go.
Johnny, what if it's a guy that really hits?
The majority of them are.
Right,
Yeah, right, exactly.
Like, you can't get rid of that
Exactly.
guy. Yeah.
It's not a coincidence that you see guys popping up in the playoffs with different uniforms that are good. The majority of the time, those guys are good. They are. But there's no one in the clubhouse at a lower talent level, which is a lower totem pole, a lower service, that can hold that guy accountable. And that's where you lose the team, that's where you lose the guy, that's where you lose the ball club. Majority of those dudes that are clubhouse cancers, if you will, are really good. Because you, like I say, you have to be good to be a villain. You have to be good to have a nickname. So the dudes that are clubhouse cancers, they have to be good to even affect the clubhouse. The dudes that aren't good, they just send them out. They send them down. So there's a lot of really good players that can be cancers in a clubhouse. I've seen it all the time.
Joan, can you weigh in on that? Hopefully you can hear
Right.
Johnny. Yeah, what happens
Oh, yeah.
when that guy that you want to get rid of, your malingerer, is actually your best player?
Well, usually your best player is not going to be a malingerer because he wouldn't be your best player if he's a malingerer. You know what I mean?
Okay, or a clubhouse cancer, that
right.
sort of thing, where he's a
So
good
a
player.
clubhouse cancer. Well, I kind of agree with Johnny in that, like, again, I have a chapter on Bonds, in Kent, and, Bonds was on everybody's top list as, the biggest cancer in baseball, and Jeff Kent was in the top 5, right? And now you got both of them on the same team. And, I went into this book thinking, okay, they're going to be my examples of, quote, super disruptors, the opposite of the super carriers, only to find out that neither one was, and particularly Barry Bonds was not a cancer in that clubhouse for a lot of reasons. But part of it is kind of what, Johnny alluded to. He was such a great player, and he contributed so much to the production, to the winning success of that team, that he wasn't a cancer. And actually there is I think it was either Fangraphs or one of those, did a study of, really asked that question, was Barry Bonds a cancer? And they did all the quantification that obviously I can't do. And, came to the conclusion, as I did, that he wasn't a cancer. He was kind of on a little island of misfit toys, and the rest of the team had chemistry beyond him. I could kind of compare him to like Steve Jobs, somebody like that, who's a total jerk, just turns everybody off, but is so brilliant. And Bonds really is. I mean, he is a genius at hitting. I mean, he's a total savant. And he behaved like a savant in all that weirdness that he had and poor social skills, but he was definitely not a cancer.
How is he making anybody around him better, Joan?
He doesn't. He only makes people around him better because of how he, bats in the lineup. Jeff Kent had the best years of his career when he was batting, before or after Barry Bonds, right? But he didn't. And can you imagine the impact he could have had? So he could have lifted that every guy on that team had he been a different type of personality, but he was neutral and he didn't make them worse either, right? So, because they were all supporting each other. He was really a neutral presence who was annoying. People didn't like him, but they weren't, he didn't make that team worse. He made them way better than they would have been.
Right. Well, it helps when you don't make outs. I mean, that
Yeah.
was helpful with him. We have questions, so we have about 15 minutes. Let me ask some of these are pretty good and on some of these themes. Here's one. We all know those players who are considered a cancer in the clubhouse destroyed team dynamics. Is there a way to recruit to increase the odds that you'll be bringing in a guy who fulfills those archetype roles? That's a good one. Joan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, kind of as I alluded to, I mean, there's some people that are really obvious, like Jonny Gomes, right? Other people, you may think that you're hiring a spark plug because this person was a spark plug on a different team, but there's no guarantee he's going to be a spark plug on that team. We're so, again, we're so influenced by the people around us and the dynamic that is created by the combination of the personalities, experience, skill sets, all of that, that there's no telling who will emerge in each particular archetype.
Here's another question now. And Rickie, wait on this first. Historically, there have been divisions between Latin and American players. What's your experience in this area? What can be done to bridge this gap?
Well, I think tough conversations. I think, man, a lot of times there is a underlying issue when it comes to either just what you said, the player, Latin American players. A lot of times there's a stigma of these guys are clicked up or those guys are clicked up. I think a lot of times the tough conversations have to be had, and that only comes through good leadership in the clubhouse. Because a lot of times, and I'm sure Johnny knows back in the day, the coaches couldn't step foot in the locker room, or else, and something's going to happen to them. But for me, it was always the tough conversation is sometimes you might have those big blow-ups, but at the end of the day, we're our family, and we have one common goal.
Johnny, what about that? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's a unique situation. Like I said, unfortunate at the times, you know, packing my bags and heading west, heading east, going to different ball clubs, but now having the opportunity to play underneath a lot of Latins, playing underneath a lot of GMs, a lot of managers. Like I said, there's not really a formula about how to bridge it, but there's definitely a formula about how to screw it up. So I think once you follow the formula of how not to screw it up, and then how does it bridge itself? Well, there's a lot of different ways for it to bridge itself. You know, the easiest way is the end goal. What's the end goal? You know, the end goal should be winning. If you guys are both on board with that, it's going to be pretty easy to bridge that gap. If your end goal is not winning, if you're on a rebuilding team, a last place team, that's where you have the problems.
Joan, here's a question for you. What's the impact of the dynamics of chemistry by the managers and coaches as opposed to the impact from the players?
Well, you know, as I said, it's much, much, much bigger, the impact on the players, but, you know, among the players. But what managers and coaches can do, just like good bosses anywhere, is that, you know, you understand the value of each individual person, right? And you make sure that person knows what their value is. And again, going back to the archetypes, you know, if the manager actually understands the archetypes and can go to Jonny Gomes, who maybe not realizing how much impact he has on the team, even if he's hitting 242, that Jonny then feels supported and valued, and he's going to keep doing, you know, all the good things that he is doing in there. And I do think that when you talk about the overlap between, you know, these subgroups, you know, like Latin players and American players, African Americans, whatever, that's where a manager can help and look at, you know, well, what's the common ground? Do we have you know, an older veteran player in the Latin group and an older veteran player in the other group? And, you know, or in a position player, a guy who's a position player who's older, and, you know, so this common ground that the manager can kind of, manipulate a little bit to, you know, kind of cross-pollinate the guys who have a lot in common, as opposed to just looking at what their differences are.
Well, Joan, let me weigh in on this, because at MLB Network, we famously hire these guys, right? We have Kevin Millar, Mark DeRosa, Harold Reynolds, Sean Casey, like the best possible guys. What I've noticed what they do, Dempster, yeah, those guys, all, you know, they have one thing in common. Pedro Martinez, too. Rare superstar like that. When they all walk into a room, they make sure they reach out, come over, say hello, and they make it meaningful. They mean it.
Yep.
And they check in on you just to say hello, even if, right, you talk about bridging the gap, even if I'm not in their players' clique, I haven't seen them, Joan, in maybe 2 weeks, it'll be like, BK, how are you? How's everything? And they actually focus. Can you find those type of players? Is that something that just happens, or how do you cultivate a culture of that type of good guy?
Well, you talk about Mark DeRosa. I mean, he was on, you know, the Giants. He was on the disabled list. And I'm not sure anybody had a bigger impact on that team than Mark DeRosa for exactly the reasons you said. And so my question to you, Brian, is do you think that, is it just coincidence that they hired guys like that?
No, of course
not. Or
not.
do you think that your performance as a group, as a team on that broadcast is better for it?
Yeah, no, oh, absolutely. It's not a coincidence that we've collected those guys, right?
Right, because they make an impact. And you didn't mention, you know, how well they articulate their point of view. It was about, you know, that connection that they make sure they have with everybody there. And it matters. It has an impact. Right?
Yeah, no question. Rickie, what are your thoughts on that?
No, yeah. I mean, it definitely has an impact. I think, man, a lot of times, like I said before, you know, you get certain guys inside the clubhouse. They're, you know, typically the best player in the team. They have this captain label, things like that. But the ones who are the best leaders in the clubhouse are the guys who check up on people, who are your nicest people. And a lot of times, you know, that I think that does translate to the field as well.
Here's an interesting question. Joan, in my opening remarks today, I mentioned the Astros and where we are there. So here's a question from our group. The clubhouse chemistry is a subset of the organizational culture. The Astros culture, according to the commissioner, was deeply flawed. Can you discuss, I can't see what the rest of it is, but we're off to a good start. Can you discuss possibly Astros culture, Joan, given what's happened in this offseason?
No. I mean, I don't know anything about the Astros culture, frankly. I mean, I only know what I read, and you can't know the culture unless you're actually in there and know it, truthfully. But, you know, maybe the guys have more insight into that than I do.
Okay, Jonny and Rickie, without passing judgment, just your thoughts generally on the whole matter.
You know, maybe the guys have more.
It sucks. It sucks for the game. It sucks for the individual. I don't blame them though. I don't. You know, I use the example of like someone who doesn't have a lot of money, like robbing a bank. Like, yeah, give it a shot, man. Go ahead.
He doesn't mean literally.
But if you get caught, you're going to jail. Like, it's the easy way out, right? Like, I don't blame these guys. Right? If the rules weren't out there as much and they're getting away with it, I don't blame them for trying to, you know, get an edge or all this stuff at all. I mean, you're to do a baseball IQ type. Like, they were ahead of the curve. They were smart. They were doing it when no one else was doing it. But if you get caught, like, you got to go to jail, or if you get caught, you got to be punished. So, and I think working in an atmosphere where everyone hates you is going to be tough.
Rickie?
Yeah, to me, I think I'm coming from a different angle. I was more so when it first came out. I didn't have all the information. I'm thinking, oh, you know, somebody was second base, probably saw the signs in the, you know, here in the back all year long. But when you read the details of what was going on, that's when I kind of had a problem with it. But like Jonny said, I do see the player's standpoint when you're put inside a position coming from up top, telling you what's going on. As a player and in a family-oriented clubhouse, it's kind of hard to keep your head and, yeah, I'm gonna be that guy that, you know, off to the side, like, yeah, man, y'all get your numbers up. I'll just keep my 220 and not get paid for next year. So, I mean, I do get the player's side. There's a twofold answer, but all in all, yes, it is wrong. But I mean, I do get the stigma around it.
Okay. No, I don't think there's a perfect answer on that. Joan, here's maybe this could be the last part of this, and I think it's worth re-asking because, and it was asked, but this is a basic point. Can you create? Probably worded the question better than I did. Can you create chemistry, or does it have to happen organically? Go ahead, Joan. That's to you.
Yeah, no, you have to be able to foster it for sure, and you know, having key leadership in the clubhouse and management that understands and values it, right? So learning a lot more about team chemistry and how you foster it is, you know, I mean, analytics, I'm a huge fan of analytics, and I was at the MIT Sloan Analytics Conference and was fascinated by the presentations, right? And I think that the advantage to teams of analytics is narrowing just because everybody, you know, now have these bunkers filled with, you know, Ivy League, you know, brainiacs who can, you know, figure out what every advantage they have. But I think the real advantage now, the next advantage is to the people who can figure out how to foster, harness, recognize, you know, this sort of hidden power that you cannot, you can't quantify it. Yeah, that's a fool's errand. You can't quantify it, but it is as real as launch angle. And the teams that figure that out are going to have the new advantage.
Jonny, what are your thoughts on that? You work with the Diamondbacks now, right? So if you're assessing the clubhouse, how would you try to, as Joan said, foster that sort of winning environment, or can you?
So I think when you break down like culture, like you can't have culture without an end goal. You can have mentality, right? You can all fight together and you can all show up on time and follow the rules, But I think like a culture, to have a proper culture, you're all chasing the same goal. And you're all pulling, the rope in the same direction. So you want to talk about culture, but you can't just have culture without a goal. There has to be an end result. So if everyone in your clubhouse isn't on board with that end resort, maybe this guy's trying to make the all-star team. So you go to those 2014 A's I was on, young guys starting to get it, and they all made the all-star team. We went from no all-stars to 7 all-stars. And then you look at the second half of the season, they all laid it down because they hit their goal. This is my perspective. They hit their goal. They wanted to make the all-star team. They did it. And then we kind of laid it down. We were in the division lead the whole way down. We ended up playing the all-star game. So, there's a culture, but then you need to have a mentality, which is believing in that culture, and then the culture is set by the end result, which is your goal, and you have to get all those people on board. And at the end of the day, if you got 25 guys in the clubhouse, you really don't need 25 guys. You really don't. If you have 23, well, those 23 all have to bully those 2, and those 2 can't be the clubhouse cancer. And when you let those 2 ruin a whole clubhouse, your 23 weren't strong enough as those 2. So there's a lot more. You say culture, but there's got to be goals in set. Your manager, could, screw it up or, go the other way. You want to lose a team real quick, tell a team they can't bring their phones into the clubhouse. They won't win.
Joan, what about that? Jonny is big on identity and obviously a sense of mission, right? In setting a mission. Can that be done from up top or within the group? Can a mission happen that just doesn't happen organically? Can you set that mission and make that happen?
Oh, absolutely. Again, it's the military. You do have to have a sense of purpose. You do have to have meaning. Why is this meaningful? And it has to be meaningful beyond just, we're going to get a trophy at the end of the season. It has to be, truly personally meaningful and meaningful that you're part of this. One of the great exhilarating things about being part of a team, a truly connected, focused, driven team. There's this, and Rickie and Jonny can tell me if I'm completely off base here, but there's a sense of completeness that you feel. It's almost as if, it's the perfect you in this moment with these exact people in this exact quest. And when you can pull everybody, as Jonny says, onto the same track of meaning and purpose, and everybody's giving full effort, and your teammates, as the season goes on, you're so close that your teammates become the meaning and the purpose. You've really got something that is tough to beat. Now, team chemistry can't manufacture talent. So you're only going to be as good as your talent can take you. You're going to be the best version of that talented team. Mm-hmm. But you will certainly be better.
Excellent. Joan, thank you so much. I look forward to reading it. You're going to have to do some work to sell me on that bonds chapter, but I'm willing to read it.
I can't wait to hear your feedback, Brian.
I'm sure. Joan, best to Barry, and thank you so much. Good speaking with you.
Thank you.
All right, Joan Ryan there. And again, that's why these guys are glue guys. They showed up in the midst of chaos. Jonny Gomes, Rickie Weeks. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.